Greetings for the day, everyone. I feel privileged to extend my warm welcome to the STAR Conference 2021. Thank you for being here with us for the thematic forum on towards knowledge, diplomacy, or sharp powers with international student mobility today. We are very pleased to be able to welcome and host the STAR Conference 2021 at International Institute of Higher Education Department at OP Jindal Global University, India. Without any further delay, let's welcome our guest for the forum, Dr. Usman Gultaking, who will be sharing insights on intercultural communication and the future of education through his presentation, followed by the discussion and Q&A. So over to you, sir.
Okay. Thank you very much for the introduction. Hello and welcome to everyone. Thank you for joining in this thematic forum with me. Before starting, I would like to tell you a little bit about myself and outline of my presentation. And after the presentation, the floor will be open to your questions and comments. I still research on this subject, and I'm sure your comments would provide very useful insights for further analysis and studies. So I appreciate in advance for your participation and inputs. Yes, my name is Osman Gültekin. I am the Director of International Relations and faculty member today at Fenerbahçe University in Istanbul, Turkey. I am also the president of 150-year-old Pertemniyel School Alumni Association in Turkey. And I do my postdoc work currently at Carleton University in Ottawa, Canada, as a virtual researcher during these pandemic times. And I got my PhD degree from political science and international relations 2 years ago. I believe many of these conference participants have educational sciences background, unlike me, but my doctoral dissertation subject is about international higher education and international students studying in Turkey. And in my research, I surveyed foreign students studying in Turkey for their soft power perceptions of their educational experience. That was a great research experience, and I came across with many comparative and international education academic literature sources. So I guess I am somewhat became related to this discipline. Overall, I try to research on the subject of the intersection of and interplay between international education and international relations. So after a brief introduction of myself, I would like to tell you about the outline of my presentation. This session is about two important concepts related to international higher education and international student mobility trends that those two concepts are knowledge, diplomacy, and sharp powers. And first, I would like to tell you about why I wanted to research on this subject. So I want to tell you about my research questions. Then I would like to provide some information about the contextual and historical background for international student mobility. Then I will be telling about soft power as the central concept for the relationship between international education and international relations. Then I will be introducing two relevant theories as responses to limitations of educational soft power model. They are knowledge, of course, knowledge diplomacy and sharp powers. And after discussing a few points in this comparison, and I will conclude my presentation. And I would like to start by highlighting the questions that brought me to think over about the international education and international student mobility. First, I was curious to see the current situation in the international student mobility in the world, and I wanted to see what the current global trends and issues in international education and the factors in the world currently. Secondly, I wanted to see how the policies of national governments affect the landscape of international student mobility and international education globally. And I wanted to see how they utilize or instrumentalize international education activities in their public diplomacy and foreign policy making efforts. And of course, what I wanted to research particularly has been the link between international education and international relations along with soft power. How is the interplay between international education and international politics taking place? That was one of my main questions. And lastly, and as the main subject of this presentation, I want to add a theoretical framework about the current situation in international student mobility activities. And I try to find which theory could explain better the current international higher education activities. And I think knowledge diplomacy theory from an educational scientist, Jane Knight, and sharp power theory of Christopher Walker from political science academic discipline do better job in explaining the current situation in the world. So I would like to introduce those two theories and show their relations with current international higher education activities in the world. And I would like to compare and discuss about those two theories. And this is the current situation or the situation in the last century regarding the international student mobility in the world. The trends show that the number of international students has increased dramatically over the years, especially after World War II. The number of international students was about 4.5 million students in 2011, and it is anticipated that there will be 8 million students, international students, traveling to other countries to study abroad by 2025. Currently, the numbers are around 6 million in the world. 70% of international students choose OECD countries as a destination to study. Of course, English-speaking countries are the most attractive countries for international students, and they, meaning UK, the United States, Australia, New Zealand, and Canada, account for more than half of the international students in the world. According to Institute of International Education institution, the most popular destination countries for international education in the world are the United States, the UK, Canada, China, Australia, France, Russia, Germany, and Japan. In the last decades, traditional Western host countries are challenged increasingly by emerging destinations such as China and Russia, and some other destinations. In 2001, the leaders, the United States, share in the total international student market was 28%. Yet in 2020, it is 20%. While the UK's share fell from 14% to 10%, and Germany's from 12% to 5%, Canada, China, and Russia made a big jump. And they are now at the top 10 list. Currently, Canada and China have 9% and Russia has 6% of the global market, as shown on the chart on the right-hand side. And to tell a little bit about the historical background of the international education and international student mobility in the world, international education has passed different phases in world history, and in every stage it became more sophisticated and professionalized. When looked at chronologically, initially archaic internationalization has occurred in ancient Greece with itinerant teachers around the 4th and 5th centuries BC. And in the 8th and the 9th centuries, Baghdad in the Arabic world emerged as the intellectual center at its time and attracted many scholars from different parts of the world. The first institutional or internationalization was observed in the medieval ages of the 13th and 14th centuries with the inception of the very first universities in Europe. And starting in the 14th and 15th centuries, nationalization of the universities occurred, and the states started to use their own national language as the language of instruction in their higher educational system. So it was a little bit of pause to the international student mobility activities. But in the 16th century, with the spread of humanism in Europe, academic mobility has increased again. Towards the 19th century, more nation states were established and they formed their own national educational model. And during the global colonization period, although low-key, education was used as an instrument to strengthen the influence on the exploitation of the people and the land. In the 19th century, until the First World War, Germany, along with Britain and France, were the center of internationalization in higher education in the 19th century until the First World War. After the World War I, Britain and France continued to receive international students in large numbers. This traditional internationalization continued until World War II as unplanned, unorganized, and unstructured. However, after World War II, the world entered a developmental age. The international organizations were promoting global education for developmental purposes. And with the international development aspects and evolutional progress in international relations and diplomacy, student mobility was organized by the scholarships of donor countries and organizations, often in the frameworks of bilateral arrangements. The use of international academic exchanges as foreign policy and diplomacy instruments has started in this period. Education for development was exploited to intervene in the domestic affairs of developing countries in many cases. So this international development and aid period lasted until the neoliberal paradigm induced in the world society in the 1980s. Before then, the exchange of international students was on an individual basis, and it was done in a more genuine internationalization framework. However, with the neoliberal effect, international education has become more of an economic and corporate subjects in the 1980s. In this period, the neoliberal paradigm and changing demographics pushed the countries to privatize their educational systems along with a massification process, and it paved the way for increasing the commercialization and commodification of education in the 1990s. And when we come to the 2000s, by the turning of the millennium, with the inclusion of education as a tradable commodity under the service sectors by the World Trade Organization, cross-border education was formally recognized as a consumption abroad along with other educational mobilities. After this point, international education and international student mobility have been taken a further step, and student mobility numbers skyrocketed in intense efforts of higher education institutions within two mechanisms. One of them was the global rise of private universities, and the second one is the Bologna process in Europe. So those two mechanisms really increased the number of international students traveling to other countries for higher education. So, but at the international level, the influence of rankings changed the landscape of international education completely. The competition among universities and countries over international student mobility has been affected to a great extent. In order to attract more international students, universities and national governments also start to work hard together to be ranked as the highest possible on the ranking tables. And in this framework, because they were working closely together, on this competition, they kind of like form a mercantilist relationship with each other. So, however, in this process, because they prioritize their national and domestic interests, this caused the universities to become more nationalistic rather than being more international and universal. Besides the emergence of countries that are investing heavily in public diplomacy channels, including international education, resulted in a soft power competition among countries. This soft power competition had indeed interesting repercussions in the international education sector. Currently, there has been a trend of South-South student mobility and regionalization with the emerging hub countries in the world other than traditional South to North mobility patterns towards Western destinations. And so here, I would like to sum up the historical milestones in the relationship between international education and international relations that are the most related to our main discussion. This is our main discussion. So until the 1950s, international student mobility has been observed at the individual level and as unorganized. Involvement of national governments has been stayed at a very low levels. But after the World War II, it was the first time that international education has been used as a tool in foreign policy making of winner developed countries through international development projects. And also their national, cultural, and educational promotion agencies had intensive efforts in developing countries to recruit the most talented and brightest brains in developing countries. After that neoliberal paradigm in 1980s and World Trade Organization's definition of education as a tradable commodity catalyzed the commodification of education along with the global rise of private universities. In this period, national government's involvement in international education was representing a very interesting case. I would like to call this situation a form of mercantilism because the national governments were giving incentives to their national educational institutions and cooperating with them for their global promotion and marketing. By this, they were aiming economic and political influence, and ultimately, they were competing with other countries over international education. So clearly, there has been a race for soft power. In that sense, national governments' involvement and their ambitious positions in international education business was representing another realm of power struggle in the world. And it was of great importance in international relations as an academic discipline. And it was really worth to make research on. And with this soft power competition and race for political and economic benefits over international education, hastened by regionalization and South-South student mobility patterns, had some limitations as we will be discussing shortly. So what is next? It is certain that international education has become very instrumentalized in the country's soft power competition, but this soft power competition had some problems and contradicting with the genuine purposes of intercultural exchanges. So my ultimate question is, are we going towards knowledge diplomacy or sharp powers, as the title of the presentation shows? I think before answering this question, whether the world is going towards the knowledge diplomacy or sharp powers, we need to tell a little bit about soft power as a concept and how we should perceive educational soft power specifically. To start with, soft power is a type of power that stems from a country's attractive elements, such as culture, values, and foreign affairs. So, unlike hard power, it is very intangible, hard to measure it. Also, it's a form of power neither purely liberal nor realist. The father of the concept, Joseph Nye, tells the same thing. Some scholars call soft power as an iron fist in a velvet glove. And we can definitely understand the reason why they call it like that. And recently we started to talk about sharp powers. Sharp powers imply the manipulation of soft power in a global power struggle. So we will be discussing more in detail in the incoming slides. And sharp powers use the soft power techniques heavily, including international education, along with other public diplomacy channels. But those powers don't really have anything attractive to offer to the rest of the world with regards to their democratic credentials, values, and norms. So as far as international education is concerned, a country's soft power image is particularly influential during two stages. One of them is in the pre-departure period. The second one is in the post-departure period. So in the pre-departure period, the prospective international students are influenced by the state-level soft power indicators, such as the gross domestic product of the country's positions in world politics and international organizations, their technology level, their world-famous brands, number of universities in global university rankings are essential in this period. So pre-departure period is all about the perceptions of the students by looking from outside. However, during the post-departure period, after the international students start to live and study in a foreign country, individual level perceptions with regards to the satisfaction of the students about their international education experience in the host country gain greater importance. The post-departure period perceptions give us more realistic feedbacks about the country's soft power image because they are based on the lived experiences of real people. So the host countries, basically they assume the students who are coming to study in their countries will think how great their country and culture are. And also they think when their national students go abroad for education, they will be their cultural ambassadors to the world, and they will show how great their people and culture are to the rest of the world. However, the things don't go always like that. It is indeed a two-way interaction rather than a one-way. The students whom they send abroad may like it better there and stay there, as we commonly come across. By this, they might lose their most talented and the brightest students to other countries, and that would cause what is called the famous term brain drain. In addition, the students whom they hosted may not always be sympathizers of their countries, of the hosting countries. Actually, there are many examples of that. For example, Said Qutb was a university exchange student in the United States, but when he returned back to his home country, to Egypt, he became very active against US global policies, and he was one of the influential figures in Arabic politics. So for national governments, they should be aware that hosting international students is a very critical and serious business. The quality of education, along with other elements of soft power, really matters. They need to be attractive in all aspects: the culture, the people, the environment, living standards, quality of higher education, campus facilities, for example. They are all important items. Ultimately, international students' learning and cultural experience and their overall satisfaction determine the country's educational soft power image. So when we look at the limitations of educational soft power model, we see that not all hosted students may like the hosting country and culture during their educational experience, in the hosting country. So the host country's investment or heavy planning may produce some adversary or counterintuitive results. It is just because the host countries don't have a perspective for prioritizing or enhancing the experience of incoming visitor uh, international students to their countries. And also, they may think their national students will do a cultural representation abroad for their nation, but they may lose those people as well due to more positive experience abroad. Comparatively, more genuine and more attractive cultures or nations will win over the less attractive ones. Both cases show the countries can easily be fallen into manipulation of soft power in this international education business and act as like sharp powers. And also, they neglect the fact that international educational exchanges are not a one-way interaction, but it is a two-way indeed. So there's a mutuality. So in these regards, I think knowledge diplomacy and sharp power theories are the most relevant theories when we consider about the prospects of international students' mobilities. So let's first look into knowledge diplomacy theory. This theory claims that the current educational soft power framework characterizes the situation in a power paradigm with the concepts of self-interest, competition, or dominance. However, Knight suggests international educational activities can be interpreted more in a diplomacy paradigm, where the nations can find a win-win or mutual sum game results rather than win or lose or zero-sum game outcomes, as realist theory in international relations field suggests. So this approach is a liberal one, and it is coming from educational science field. And basically, it says knowledge diplomacy concentrates on the role of international higher education and research in building and strengthening the relationships between and among nations. On the other hand, we have sharp powers. Sharp powers often see cultural relations, internationalization of higher education, and educational exchanges as one-sided or nation-centric image-making endeavors in soft power competition. This discourse of soft power is reduced to struggle in cultural ascendancy and competition for getting a higher number of incoming international students. In essence, this non-mutual and partial interpretation of public diplomacy and cultural diplomacy causes the abuse of soft power, if not a sort of neo-realist use of power or weaponization of power. The case resembles the soft power competition of the states using propaganda techniques during the Cold War. However, this time propaganda and information warfare are carried out subtly in different communication platforms by using instruments of public diplomacy and soft power. And of course, the strong trend in the world is a race for soft power. Investment and appetite in cultural diplomacy and exchange diplomacy are the highest, especially among BRICS countries. In parallel to their rising economic power profile, those countries would like to raise their international image outlook accordingly by involving in public diplomacy efforts densely. However, their political credentials and credibility may not always be fit with the with the uh, with the soft power image that they would like to construct through public diplomacy or through international education activities. So most of the time they replace one of the pillars of soft power, let's say domestic values, with another feature that they have, for example, economic development. So their economic profile can be attractive to others, but not their values. So despite their intense efforts, due to inconsistencies between their values defended in the international area and the practices that they do within their societies, their public diplomacy efforts are doomed to fail or do not produce the desired results. So the father of the concept, Walker, claims through authoritarian learning, for example, by adapting or mimicking democratic forms and by exploiting the opportunities presented by globalization, authoritarian trendsetters have created a modern anti-democratic toolkit that in many ways serves as the mirror image of democratic soft power. It includes government organized and non-organized non-governmental organizations, zombie election monitoring, foreign aid and investment, and both traditional and new media enterprises. So authoritarian countries using soft power like techniques are defined as sharp powers. They are defined as sharp because they penetrate in and pierce information circles in targeted states. More specifically, sharp power refers to authoritarian use of soft power. Those countries' aim is not to win the hearts and minds of the people in other countries or foreign audiences, including international students visiting their countries, but to manage the target audiences by manipulating and creating disinformation in favor of their national interest. It is a particular threat to vulnerable democracies since those sharp power countries are not disseminating democratic values to the world, but unattractive values of authoritarian systems such as monopoly on power, top-down control, censorship, coerced and purchased royalty in the guise of economic development and non-alignment in the world order. But their real story is in their home countries entrenched with kleptocracy, massive environmental problems, censorship, equality, and political repression. So I introduced those two theories about international. Okay, I have 10 more minutes left, and I will be happy to hear your comments and thoughts before I would like to end my presentation. But before that, I would like to add my 2 cents in and add a conclusion of mine. And so I think knowledge diplomacy assumes a Western normative and idealist perspective in the international higher education field. However, it's very questionable whether or not it actually reflects the genuine motivations and visions of national governments who are creating and implementing policies for international higher education. However, we started to see more academic works every day about malicious foreign influence on international students, unhappy experiences of international students in top receiving countries, the political propaganda they receive in those hosting countries, along with spy students that are sent by some home countries to other countries. So all that suggests the genuine purpose of academic interchanges are replaced by some sharp power motivations. Actually, I think it is really worth making further research on the examples of these sharp power practices on international education activities. So, so in some, we can say competition for political influence turn into mercantilism, so with the involvement of national governments. And the national government starts to manipulate the soft power techniques. So the it is more feasible to talk about like the sharp powers is more relevant what's happening or like what's going to happen in the near future in the international student activities in the near future. And I know it's a little bit of pessimistic portray of what's happening in the international student mobility activities, but it may be a more realist one. So the conclusion is, in regards to international education and student mobility, there is an erosion of higher education soft power influence due to abuse of educational and exchange diplomacy. For sharp powers, cultural and exchange diplomacy become a mere propaganda and fend-off method to block to the other major attractive cultures to make inroads to their countries. And so this situation actually creates a gap between the volume of resources or student numbers and desires for policy outcomes. If the students go to those countries, they may enjoy the culture while living in a foreign country, but if they are satisfied with the education experience and observe unattractive domestic political developments in those countries, they will not become sympathizers or may not act willingly according to those countries' foreign policy goals. So that was my presentation. I thank you for your attention, and the floor is open for your questions, comments, and maybe for your examples.
Thank you for an engaging and insightful presentation, Dr. Osman. It was interesting to know about the movement of international students since the ancient times and to know your insights on the future of education in regard to the intercultural communication. And also the linking of international students movement to the soft and sharp power was very enlightening. And we have a question in the chat box from Urvashi. She says, superb presentation. Could you please explain more about how is it a threat to democracies?
The sharp power is obviously a threat to democracies because they are acting like they are real democracies, but they are not. When I was talking about the like sharp powers course, they are just exploiting the opportunities in the world. They know that they are not, there is less possibility in the world, in today's world, about like going a war with other countries. They use, to the extreme of the manipulation limits, and they want to like have influence, malicious influence on other countries' public opinion. So they are a real threat. They are sometimes now with the sharp power literature, they are now noticed, but they were going unnoticed and deep. But now, with these theories, I believe we can like address them better.
Urvashi, I hope your question is answered. She says thank you in chat. Any more questions from the audience? You can either unmute or just write it in the chat box. Any more questions, comments?
This is a subject that I'm still doing the research on. I think I finished with the theoretical framework, but I need more examples of that. Like the students when they go to another country. Actually, there are some, but when they go to other countries, how they face the propaganda of the hosting country. Sometimes it's a political propaganda, or some countries, rival countries, when they host students from other countries, from their rival nation, they start to do propaganda and try to show bad of their their home country's culture or home country's political uh, developments. So it is being happening subtly.
Yes. I before finishing this session, I have one question. So referring to the figures that you showed in the beginning of the session, those UNESCO figures, the position of country like Canada moved from 2% to 12%. So what do these countries actually do to attract international students? To what is their law of attraction towards the international students, that they were able to raise their ranking when it comes to becoming a host country?
Canada is, I think it's the best example, doing the things right in this international student mobility in regards to involvement of national government. They have two important things, right planning, right government support. It is a very mercantilist way because the government works closely with the national colleges, national universities in their recruitment of efforts overseas. And secondly, the country is handsome, very attractive. When the foreign students go there, they really enjoy multiculturalism. They are treated not as like foreigners, so they can easily adapt the country. It's an immigrant society in Canada, so they made a big jump. So they did a very balanced work together with the institutions and the government. So they were really successful, and the quality of education is high. So the students, when they go there, and also they offer post graduation work permits. Those are all well planned strategies. But for example, Russia and China they are being in top 10 recently. They have, for example, some scholars, maybe I don't name them as the examples of sharp powers. They have intense efforts to recruit many students, many as possible, from other countries. But when the students go there, because they are not prepared for international campus environments, the students, most of the time, they are not happy. And this actually leaves a negative image on their soft power image. So it's not sustainable. Okay, they are a big country, and their economic development aspect or political outlook aspect can be attractive, but according to soft power literature, they might be not performing well in regards to their democratic credentials within the country and for their foreign affairs. So I think it may not be sustainable for them, but they are major players in global international student mobility, of course.
Yes, thank you for answering the question. So this was a really thought-provoking discussion, along with amazing questions from our audience. So at last, I would like to thank all of you for being here with us for the thematic forum on towards knowledge diplomacy or sharp power with international students mobility today. And I would like to thank a special word of thanks to Dr. Usman for presenting his insights on the future of education with all of us here. Thank you so much, sir.
I thank you, everyone.